Islamic Serbia and Central Asia, Islamic Byzantium, Burgundians conquering Spain, Sweden ruling Britain, Belgians and Scots fighting over Ireland. Yeah, this is an EU4 model, right? Age of the Two-Headed Wolf, and no, I will not attempt to pronounce its Latin name, is a mod for European 4, and as I like to call, a weird mod. It messes with history so much that the timeline basically becomes unrecognisable, and honestly that's a good thing. It means the setting, nations and map are way more unique. For this video I'll be covering two nations, one from the original 1.0 release and one from the newer 1.1 update. Let's dive right in, starting with Siecheng, another nation I should probably avoid trying to pronounce as we go forward. This nation is a small city-state in Eastern Europe. You start with a single province, and at max you'll grow to 5 provinces. Every territory you take outside of your starting state will be handed over to one of 4 vassals. These are unique vassal types that only exist for you. They represent the 4 cardinal directions, that being north, south, east and west. What I find really interesting about this is that of course you have your own mission tree, but your vassals also have mission trees, and your own mission tree gives you no permanent claims outside of your starting province. All of the mission claims you get from this nation are from your vassals' mission trees, meaning you really have to commit to going down their trees and fulfilling their objectives. You also gain permanent buffs to both you and them by going down their mission trees. I found this a really interesting use of vassals' mission trees. Normally, vassal mission trees are kind of like an extra add-on maybe in a mod or have some integration into the existing tree, but the way that you basically have to go through the vassal mission trees in order to complete your own tree is very interesting, and the fact that you can't really expand unless you're using your vassals' mission trees is also really interesting. And as I said, the fact that you gain permanent modifiers from fulfilling their criteria in their mission trees for both you and them really incentivizes you to actually do their mission trees. But let's take a step back and actually look at this nation's government reform. So essentially you have an immortal ruler, which represents the council of this city. As I said, the council is immortal, so its stats are largely set in stone. But what does happen is we have modifiers that represents the people on the council, and at certain times they of course retire or die. When that happens, we get events which allow us to select a new person on the council. These events are pretty simple. You either get a choice between spending some admin mill or dip points depending on which sector that person presided over, or we gain the option to essentially roll the dice for a chance to increase or decrease the stat generation of the ruler. I think this is quite a unique idea, but I would have liked an option to maybe spend a lot more of the mana type to permanently increase the stats of the ruling council, because we can essentially spend 100 of the mana point to maintain the current level, or we can just risk rolling for a chance to increase. So I would have liked if we could really just invest a lot of points, maybe 200 or 300, into just guaranteeing an increase in the stat. Together with our unique ruler, we also have a unique government reform, which acts as a bar that goes up based on actions we take. This bar is actually pretty powerful. For example, at the max level of it, we gain 100% decrease to the cost of raising stability, as well as 5 of each monarch point, that being admin, diplomacy and mill, which as you can imagine is really powerful. The main way you increase this bar is by you doing 3 kinds of actions, either spending the development of your capital, or spending the development of your subjects, or spending manpower and money. This bar is essentially always decreasing until you get towards the end of the mission tree, where you reach a point where it will just constantly increase. This bar is also pretty important for the mission tree, as many of your missions require you to spend this bar. So in this way, we get a style of gameplay where we're basically draining resources from our vassals and ourselves to increase this bar, which we then spend to go down the mission tree and fulfill the criteria. The mission tree itself is also quite interesting. As I said, we don't really expand via the mission tree. Instead, the mission tree is all about developing and adding bonuses to our capital city, the center of the universe, as it were. For example, we often have to build buildings in the capital, and then we essentially destroy them to gain a permanent buff. For example, you'll build a church which you'll then destroy as part of the mission tree, and you'll gain a modifier that essentially acts as a church, which allows you to then build a second church in the province, essentially giving you 2 churches inside the province. So in a way, you're stacking your buildings by sacrificing them, which obviously will massively increase the costs. Towards the end, you've essentially got 3 churches, 3 workshops, 3 marketplaces inside your capital, which really amplifies the buffs, adding on to the fact that you don't really conquer anything, so you're usually swimming in admin, mill, and dip points. So of course, you invest all of those into your city, which you also need to reach a certain level of development to complete the mission tree. I did mention that you take the other provinces around your capital province, and in those provinces you essentially turn them into mega forts, where you build forts in them, then sacrifice them to amplify the attrition and the defensibility of the province, to essentially build a great wall around your capital. I actually really enjoyed this style of gameplay. Though we don't really expand ourselves, we expand a lot via our vassals and give them essentially any land we take is handed over to them. And it really nails the vibe of building this large scale empire that in reality exists for the sole purpose of supplying and maintaining this large capital city. I will say there was something that I consider kind of a bug in the mission tree, but I'll talk about that later when I get to my negative section. One other thing of note is we are a Confucius nation, so we gain access to harmonization, but because we never really take any provinces we can harmonize, instead we have a unique way of harmonizing where once we reach 100% harmonization, we can then spend all of our harmonization to harmonize a religion that one of our vassals controlled. We can then share our harmonization with our vassals so they all have harmonized the same religions we have, which is again another really interesting use of the mechanic, since otherwise we wouldn't be able to use harmony since we never actually conquer unharmonized provinces for ourselves. When you finish the mission tree, you have the option to form the Dragon Empire, which unfortunately doesn't have a mission tree for itself, so that's where the run really ends. I'd be really interested to see how the Dragon Empire works when it eventually gains, if of course it eventually gains a mission tree, because when you form the Dragon Empire, you integrate all of your vassals and you now are no longer restricted by them and can expand freely. So I'd be interested to see how the gameplay for that one would work. Personally, I'm not really sure I like the idea from transitioning from this massive vassal swarm to just a conventional empire. I kind of would like a route where you expand your vassals to all of the continents and regions on the planet and just build a massive Earth-covering empire, all based in a single city, which sounds kind of fun. Now let's move on to the second nation I want to talk about, Alabadia, or Albadia, not really sure how to pronounce it. This nation's rather interesting because this is essentially a Roman successor state, but actually based in North Africa, which is a region we don't normally see Roman successor states. These guys are quite interesting in the fact that they essentially were the government, the Roman successor state for Africa, which has now just collapsed a little bit before the start date. They have a unique government reform, which only gives negatives, funnily enough, but it does come with a bar, which if you max, it then switches to a better version of the government reform, which then gives bonuses, as well as access to the divine idea group, which is always a good one to have access to. These guys, as well as North Africa in general, also has access to their unique religion, their very own unique branch of Christianity. In this setting, Christianity is essentially fractured far more than in our setting. We essentially have Southern Christianity in North Africa, Western Christianity in France, and then of course Catholicism that's mainly just based in Italy and Germany. With, of course, as I mentioned, the Byzantine Empire converting to Islam, there is no orthodoxy in this mod. This nation is a lot more simpler and conventional as opposed to the Siechang, as I mentioned. But then it'd be hard to compete with the very unique gameplay style. As I said, this nation is far more conventional, but it does a really good job what it's doing. As I said, playing as a Roman success state in North Africa is something we don't normally see. We have unique government reforms, we have a unique vassal religion. We also have our mission tree also expands once we form Africa, so there's double the content, as it were. It's really geared towards just restoring Rome, just based in Africa. Another interesting idea this nation has is that we, as I mentioned, we have a bar that once we fill, will allow us to gain access to a new government form. That government form unfortunately shares the exact same mechanics as the previous one, essentially just a better version. I will say I think the bar here is kind of weak mechanically. It does give buffs, obviously, and we also gain 3 buttons. One that essentially lets us spend manpower to increase the bar, and 2 others let us spend the bar for buffs. I don't think those buffs are actually that good. One of them lets us trade 50 admin to increase crown authority, which honestly I'm not sure I'd really ever want to do. There's very few occasions where I'd want to spend admin just to gain crown authority, right? And the third one is, I think, kind of useless. You can spend 50 mil to gain a Holy War CB on a random nation, and personally I went religious ideas in this playthrough, making that completely worthless, right? Maybe if it gave you access to the Great Holy War Casus Belli, it'd be more useful, but even then I think I'd probably just stick with the normal religious ideas. So I would say the bar is a little weak in that regard. It does give buffs, but I think it could have had better abilities that you could use. Maybe that could let you spend the bar to gain money or something, or stability. That would have been sensible, or logical I should say. The unique religion these guys have, the Southern Christianity, uses the Coptic mechanics where of course you take cities and then gain permanent buffs, so nothing too unique in that regard, but it was nice playing as a different branch of Christianity and having unique mechanics to them. Unfortunately, I don't really have much left to say about this nation. I did enjoy it quite a lot. In fact, I might have enjoyed it more than Siechang, but the problem is it's very conventional, so there's not much to talk about. I enjoyed having my essentially African Roman legions marching around Europe, conquering Spain, conquering the Holy Land, and then into Italy. But as I said, it was a very conventional style of play. These guys didn't really have that many unique mechanics, but that's fine. Not everyone has to have insane mechanics, right? As a good conventional playthrough, it worked really well. Now let's move on to the positives. I actually have quite a few things to say here. So let's start with, I really think the setting is interesting. It's different enough from normal real life to draw your attention, but similar enough that you of course will understand who is who at a glance, mostly. I really think it's hard to really have a setting in the real world that is different enough that it stands out, and I think this mod does a good job of doing that. I also think the mod does a good job of changing things up mechanically without straying too far from the main game. If you wanted something that was maybe a little different in its setting but didn't want to go full fantasy, like for example Anbanar or other mods, then I think this mod is kind of what you're looking for in that regard. This mod of course adds loads of different mission trees, but on top of that it adds loads of different government reforms. I like how nearly every nation with a mission tree has their own unique government reform. I also really like the idea of splitting up Catholicism into an extra 2 religions. Since Orthodoxy is absent from the mod, it's nice to have, of course, a variance that essentially fulfill the same role. We also have access to a different form of Protestantism in this mod, Wyclifism, which is basically just Protestantism, as you'd expect. One thing about this mod that really stands out to me is having loads of Roman successor states. I love restoring Rome. No matter what mod I play, I must restore Rome. We have Byzantium, of course, we have the Socions in France, we have Britannia, we have the Holy Italian Empire, we've got Spania, and of course we have Africa, which I of course mentioned. So playing each of those and getting to restore Rome is always fun. Now I want to talk a little bit about negatives, and I hesitate to really call them negatives. Some of these are just things I would like to see added or improvements I would like to see made, so don't take this as purely just me saying these things are bad. A lot of the time these are things that I'm like, I would have liked if it happened, or if this was in the mod. Anyway, let's begin. It would have been nice to have the option to end the schism for the 3 branches of Christianity, I suppose, Western, Southern and Catholicism. Since Orthodoxy isn't in the game, there's no option to end the schism as them, obviously. I know that some of the nations do have options to essentially, once they take Rome, force the variants of Christianity to convert to their side. But it would have been nice to have more of a generic decision that any of the 3 religions could take. Maybe just controlling Rome, controlling the capitals of the 3 religions. Maybe Jerusalem would be enough to enact this decision. This is just me though. It feels like because the 3 kinds of Christianity are so close together, that being in France, in Italy and then in Africa, with Spain being kind of like the fighting ground between them. It would have made sense for them to be able to fight each other and win, essentially, and have a decision to represent one side winning, and the other two essentially falling in line with them. I also think the Protestant Reformationist mod is kind of weak, mainly because the religious league never seems to form, because Wyclifism tends to spawn in Northern Europe, and because the Holy Roman Empire in this mod is just in Italy, I've never seen the Wyclifism successfully stretch to Italy, which meant no religious leagues, at least in my playthrough. Of course, and I did a few. On that regard, I do think there needs to be another form of Christianity that spawns together with Wyclifism, because essentially we just have Wyclifism now. And normally, of course, in the main game we have Protestantism and then Reformism, which comes later. So another religion that maybe spawns in Italy or closer to Italy, which could then kickstart the religious leagues there, would be more sensible, in my view. Maybe there is, and I've just never seen it spawn because Wyclifism never seems to stretch to Italy. Germany seems to be the max of its spread, but I've also seen it just die in Scandinavia if Germany chooses not to convert to Wyclifism. Also, forming Rome says it will give you a unique government reform, but it doesn't. So with that one, I would just say change the description for the decision, because, as I said, you don't gain a unique government reform. Maybe you do. Maybe you do if you don't already. If you're not already playing as somebody with a unique government reform, maybe you do gain the Roman government reform. I can understand why you wouldn't, though, because there are so many different government reforms in this game that if everyone essentially lost them when they became Rome, everyone would lose some of their uniqueness, which I can understand why you wouldn't want to do that, obviously, as the mod developer. I also think restoring Rome takes too many provinces. It takes the usual 500 provinces, which makes sense for other people, but as Roman successor states, maybe it should be around 250 or 300. It feels like you run out of mission tree with most nations before you're even close to restoring Rome. And surely Roman successors should have an easier time restoring Rome. Maybe the criteria should be that they, of course, control Rome and have eliminated, or the other Roman successors have below a certain level of development. Another thing is I think Germany is a little too overpowered in this mod. Every game I played, Germany ended up being the final boss. If that's intended, fine, but I would like to see other states in the area survive, like Saxony. I do think Germany's a little too easy. I did a playthrough as them and I essentially did nothing for the first few years, then just magically integrated all of Germany and became Germany, which felt too powerful. I feel like they should have some sort of disaster after they become Germany, maybe. In my mind, I felt like they should split into East and Western Germany, maybe Northern, Southern Germany, and have like a large-scale conflict that way. Because as I said, they feel too powerful, and they feel like the final boss no matter who you play as. I always ended up having to fight them, which, you know, they're a little bit like the Ottomans in that regard. But again, if that's how the developer intends it, that's fine, I suppose. It's just if it isn't, then I would prefer some sort of change to make it easier. Well, not easier, but to see other people in the area thrive and not have to fight Germany every single time. Since we're on the subject of Germany, Siecheng actually has the option to, and I'm not sure if this is intended because it's kind of overpowered, but they can essentially snap nations by tributarying them. Because they're an eastern nation, they have access to the tributary peace deal option, and because you can do that, of course you're getting a lot of aggressive expansion, but for example, I tributaried Germany, and because they count as a vassal, all of the land they controlled was turned over to my unique vassals in the area, which maybe was very nice, not having to fight Germany, but I don't think it's intended, so that might be something to look at. It definitely was nice, kind of just tributarying Germany and having them just vanish from the game. Maybe you should have some sort of unique casus belli that lets you vassalize nations, which then get assimilated essentially into your unique vassals. But if this isn't intended, I don't think it's intended, so this is a bug report, as it were. Another bug report I should mention is that no matter who I played as, at some point in the game, I gained the decision to end the Mexican-Vinlandic Treaty, and I was neither Mexico or Vinland. And if I ended the treaty, the decision would just pop back up after a few in-game months. So that's probably a bug. And I think that's everything for my negatives / improvements / bug reporting. There weren't really much. There was mainly just things that I think should have been added or could be added, depending upon the mod developer, and some minor bugs, obviously. Overall, my playthroughs are bug-free mainly. I didn't really have any crashes. In fact, I had 0 crashes. A lot of the bugs were mainly just cosmetic stuff. Anyway, for the conclusion, I really enjoyed this mod. I enjoyed playing the various nations. I'll be definitely keeping an eye on its further development. If you're looking for a mod that changes the setting without becoming a full fantasy mod, then I really recommend this one. If you also want a mod that's more focused on Roman wannabes and various flavors of Rome's restorationism, then I of course recommend this mod. I'm not sure I've seen a mod with as many Roman pretender states as this one. Thank you for watching my video. I was wondering whether I should cover multiple nations in a review like this. I settled on 2 for this video. What's your review though? Should I focus on maybe a single nation or multiple, and if so, how many? It's harder when you have a mod that adds content to lots of different nations to decide who exactly should I play and record and talk about. So I'd be interested to know how the viewers, that being you, think on it. Should I just focus on a single nation? Or is talking about a few of them the right way to go about it? Anyway, remember to like, favorite, subscribe, let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and also I've actually set up a Discord server. Wow! I've never ran a Discord server or really used Discord before. I'm far too old, clearly, to have any interest in it. So feel free to pop in, tell me all sorts of things, we can talk about my videos, we can talk about video games in general, and I'm sure it'll be an enjoyable time. If you have opinions that are contrary to mine, we can argue over who is correct, which is of its own level of enjoyment, I suppose. Just feel free to come in and tell me I'm running the whole thing wrong, because I said I've never used Discord before I set up this server, so I'm sure I'm doing something wrong. For my next video, I'm actually trying to do something completely different, so we'll see if that crashes and burns. So if you watch my next video and it ends up being one of my normal sort of review videos, you can know that it did crash and burn and I decided to not do it. But if my video is completely different, then you'll know that I succeeded. Anyway, thank you for watching and see you next time.